Welcome to Losing a Child, Always Andy's Mom. On this podcast, we journey through the devastating experience of the death of a child. Grief is seldom discussed openly in our culture, and the death of a child makes people feel even more uncomfortable. We approach the topic openly and honestly, speaking to people who have lost loved ones and experts who help care for them. Whether you are a parent experiencing loss or someone who wants to support another going through this tragedy, this podcast strives to offer hope and help.
Welcome to episode 157 of Losing a Child, Always Andy's Mom. I'm Marcy Larson, Andy's mom. I know that you are just all going to love today's guest, Jam. She is simply a delight. It is amazing to me to see so much light in her when she is actually only 4 months after the death of her teenage daughter, Taylor. I don't want to go into too much detail right now because I just simply want you to hear her tell her story. So I'm going to leave it at that. Before we start, though, I do want to tell you that I am scheduling my episodes for fall and winter. So if you would like to be on the Always Andy's Mom podcast, please email me at marcy@andysmom.com. And know that if you have not received a response back, please just email again. I have been having a little bit of trouble recently as some emails have not come through. So again, if you've not heard from me, it's because I probably did not get it. So please email me again. So Marcy, M-A-R-C-Y, @andysmom.com. Right now, just sit back and enjoy listening to Jam, Taylor's mom. Thank you so much, Jam, for coming on the Always Andy's Mom podcast today. I'm so excited to talk to you.
Thank you for having me.
Yes. Oh.
I'm so excited.
Oh, I'm so glad. Yeah, we were just talking that you've not been listening really to the podcast too long now.
I'm fairly new, probably a little bit over a month, maybe.
But you are through 45 episodes already, so you are plowing through. Yep.
I am. And I've learned and drawn strengths from each one I've listened thus far. So
yes.
I'd like to thank you for doing this for us.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you so much for saying that. It is nice to get some encouragement from people, certainly, to know that I'm making a difference here, at least a little bit, right? That's what you want to do.
Are.
If you can make a difference just a little bit in the world.
Yeah.
So why don't you start out just by talking to us about your daughter, Taylor?
Taylor was a sweet, sweet, sweet soul. She was prayed for before she even was here. She was an IVF baby, a set of twins. She was twin A, the firstborn. I had them at 26 weeks, so she was a fighter in the NICU. Both girls actually came home on the same day.
Oh, wow.
Taylor was 1 pound, 1 ounce. So she was teeny tiny, very underweight, but a fighter. From birth, we overcame a lot of obstacles. She came home with an NG tube. She had some swallowing issues, and we did feeding pumps, and we overcame lots of therapy, things like that. But she was able to catch up to all of her milestones. So we started kindergarten and general education. Words can't even describe how wonderful Taylor is. She was my best friend. Such a sweet, sweet soul. She never met a stranger. That kid could compliment a stranger with just, I like your hair, and just so genuine, love to read books, the best board game player. I mean, she could kill you at Connect Four. She was...
You're my second one of those, you know.
Oh, yes.
I have another one little boy Luke, who used to, I guess college students would come over and he'd be like 5 years old and he could beat them. So now I'm thinking Taylor versus Luke. Maybe Taylor versus Luke is happening in heaven. Who knows?
Oh, I'm sure. She was a big wrestling fan, so that was the thing that her and her father had in common. And I did think of Andy when I started listening to your podcast, because she was very kind of shy, even though she had never met a stranger, but had a little anxiety. So we actually, with COVID-19, when we had to make the decision of homeschool or in school, just because when the virus was so new, we didn't know.
Yeah.
We kept both girls home, and she developed even more anxiety. So we had her in therapy and everything for that, for her anxiety. And she did have ADHD, but such a sweet, sweet soul. She was a great big sister to her twin, who has autism, and it's pretty severe. She's semi-verbal in the point where she loves to request her needs. And that's probably all that you'll get from her, but they had their special little relationship.
Yeah.
And was just a big helper to us. She would help get her baths, while we were at work, just such a little mama to her. Yeah. So such a good kid. I mean, never got in trouble at school. She always got, awards for the Star Award, or the teachers giving her candy, because she was like the one that would go to school, keep her head down and do her job. And they were so thankful just to have a little bright light that comes in and gives them fist bumps in the morning, or a little compliment. But I mean, she was such a hard worker and a big people pleaser. Like, I can't even remember having to discipline that child, just because she wanted to make sure she pleased you and that you were happy with her and proud of her. She would always say, "Mom, are you proud of me?" And so, such a good kid.
Yeah.
Such a good kid.
Yeah. And it does sound like an amazing sister.
Oh, such a good sister. She was so protective of her sister, and it is like she could have the opportunity to sit with her friends at lunch during school, but she chose to always sit with the special needs children, to sit with her sister every lunch. And she was just a protector of her sister, helper. And so, I mean, it was such a blessing just to see their special relationship. And
well, especially because her sister had such struggles and could have been really ignored by a sister. Yeah. Especially, because she was entering those teen years, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And oftentimes that happens anyway. Yeah. And as when you look at teens, they so often just want to be just like everyone else. Yeah. Right? You don't want to stand out. You don't want to be different. And Taylor sounds like a kid that didn't mind being a little bit different, and didn't mind having a sister who had significant struggles.
No, she did not. It was actually, even both girls rode the bus together, and Morgan is on a functional academic special needs bus, and she wanted to ride the bus with her sister. Like, she was there, she wanted to make sure Morgan was taken care of. I mean, just a great kid.
Yeah. So do you want to go on now and talk about what happened with Taylor? Because it's quite a complicated little story.
It really is. I will say that Taylor, the Friday before she got sick, she had a sore throat, and my husband and I were planning on going out of town just for his birthday, taking them to East Texas to spend with their grandparents. And so we took her into the pediatrician just to make sure everybody was all well, before we went out of town. And all swabs came back fine. I mean, they were like, I think she, just has allergies, so keep taking Zyrtec, blah, blah, blah. So we took them.
Because this was in April. So
this is in April. Right.
That would make sense, right?
And she did have asthma. So, just making sure all is well. So we took them both to East Texas to stay with my in-laws, and weekend went fine. We picked them up on that Monday, which was the 12th. No issues. 13th, she went off to school like it was no issues, no problems. 14th, the morning of April 14th, I am a nurse, so I went to my normal 7 shift, and my husband would get them off to school in the mornings. And so sent her to school, no issues. And I just happened, I guess around 2:30 that afternoon, I was on a quick break. And so I just happened to check my email for some reason, which I rarely ever do. And there was an email from her English language arts teacher just saying, Taylor's had a really rough day today. Her leg is bothering her. I've offered her to go to the school nurse, but she does not want to. But I, asked her if she needed anything. She said, just let my mom know. And so I just knew my child. My child never complained of anything. It was kind of like one of those things when I say, Taylor, is so-and-so bothering you? She'd be like, no, mom, like weirdo, because I'm fine. And so I knew something was wrong.
Especially if she told her teacher to tell you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that would be,
Yeah.
if the teacher did it, behind her back a little bit, it would have been totally different.
Yeah.
But, saying, let my mom know.
Yeah. Just let my
Yeah.
mom know. And so I immediately had carpooled because where I work, I'm so blessed in our neighborhood. A lot of my friends are nurses there at the same hospital. And so we sometimes carpool. And so I immediately called my husband. It was just like, something's wrong with Taylor and we need to go check on her. And I just had a feeling in my gut. And so when she got home, I FaceTimed her because she had called and said, texted me and said, Mom, we're home from school. Because she was kind of like our little helper to get her sister in, latchkey kid, whatever. And so I FaceTimed her just to kind of see if I could see what had happened. And I could just clearly just hear how much pain she was in. And I was like, baby, did you fall today? And she was like, no. And I was like, your leg wasn't bothering you this morning? She was like, no, ma'am, it just started. And so I really couldn't get a good view of how things looked. But one of my friends who lives in the neighborhood who happened to be off, I called her and I was like, hey, can you just go over and lay eyes on Taylor and see what's happening? And I said, I'm on my way, but Dallas traffic at 5 o'clock is horrible. So she came and she said, saw her, she's like, Jam, her leg is pretty swollen. And so she texted me a picture of her leg and I immediately thought it's got to be a blood clot. And reason being is just because she was on birth control. We had put her on birth control to regulate her cycles. Yeah. Because with her anxiety, we didn't want any accidents at school and her cycles were so irregular. Yeah. But she had been on it for 10 months. It wasn't like it was something new, but I was like, that her left leg was so swollen and red. I could just immediately see from the picture. So my husband and I made it home. We put her in my car. I took her to a local ER. And I guess we made it there maybe about 5:30 in the afternoon. And they checked us in. And I just knew in my gut because it was taking so long for that sono to take place. And, the ultrasound tech was like, any issues with blood clots in the family? So I knew, I was like, oh my gosh. And so they diagnosed the blood clot and immediately arranged transport for us to go to Children's Medical Center in Dallas. And so by the time, how transport takes a while, whatever, I think we made it to Children's around 11 o'clock at night. They got us checked into the hospital, immediately started an IV, and they started us on Lobinox. And so, the plan was just kind of to see if we could prevent things from developing or whatever. And over the next day or two, that was the plan. And then I guess it was on that Friday, her leg just started swelling even more so. And her pain was increased. And this child is to the point from having to get Tylenol to getting like Dilaudid for pain. Yeah. Wow. And it wasn't touching her pain at all. And so the physicians kind of talked with me and they were like, I think that we may need to, they did more imaging and it was like, this is pretty severe size clot. We may need to go in and do surgical intervention. And so at that point I was like, okay, well, let's get this is going to make
let's fix it.
Let's do it. Right. And I was so blessed. My husband had to be here with our other daughter. So I had my village, my feathers is what we call ourselves. And they came and, just sat with me in the hospital. And one of my best friends, I had been at the hospital since Wednesday. And, when I took her, I was in my scrub, still tired, no bag. And so she was like, they had told us that the surgery would be sometime Friday, but they had to fit us in. And so they was like, we don't know exactly what time. And so my friend was like, why don't you go home and just take a shower? Because, she's like, just take a shower, grab a bag. And I was like, okay, because we still didn't know what time. And I left the hospital, got here, packed the bag. And on my way back, I'd say I was probably 20 minutes out and the surgeon called and they were like, we're here, and I knew how much pain she was in. He was like, we can wait until you get here before we do anything, or I can consent you on the phone. I was like, you know what? I'm 10, 15 minutes out now. Let's go ahead and just consent because I was like, my child is hurting. I had never seen her in so much pain and felt like that was the best for her. I did the verbal consent and I made it to the hospital before they took her back, but they had just pushed like her Versed. So she was kind of, a little loopy or whatever. So just told her I loved her and they took her into surgery. And so at that time it was just myself and one of my best friends. So we went back up to her regular room, because they said, we'll keep you updated. That'll be the best place for you to hang out. So we went back to the room and hung out and they called us to let us know surgery had started and all was well. And then probably an hour into it, they called and said, we found a blood clot in her lungs. And so we're going to go in and try to get it. And so we set up and we're like, okay, well, how is she? Should we be concerned? I was like, it's okay. Right now she's stable and everything's going well. So we'll keep you posted. And so we were like, oh,
because they didn't have any suspicion for a blood clot in her lung before,
Nope.
right? So she's somehow through the clot in that process, right?
In a short amount of time. And so the next call we got was, Miss George, we need to start Taylor on ECMO. She's having trouble breathing, and this is what we need to save her life. Where are you? We need to come and consent you. And so I'm like, we're in a room or whatever. And so we're sending someone to get you. And so we're like, oh my gosh.
Right.
And they came to get us and they took us down to the ICU where she was. Sorry.
No, that's okay. This is so big, right?
They had already put her on ECMO because they were like, sorry, we just had to do it to save her life. And so they said that they had coded her for about 5 minutes and that they were able to get her back. One part of the story was the anesthesiologist who was doing the case. There was one who was like over all the anesthesia, like he was also a pediatric surgeon, and he was cross-trained in anesthesiology, and he just happened to wander into the OR while her surgery was going on, and he picked up on her vital signs that she was throwing a clot. And so he was like the one who laid the code on her, and he wasn't even supposed to be there that day. And so they were able to get her back. They started on ECMO. She was stable. And so they, of course, they said the next 24 hours she'll be critical, and we'll just have to see how she was doing. And so they let us see her, and, we were so devastated.
Right.
A lot of my friends showed up there, and my clinical manager, my job showed up, because it was just so, oh my gosh, out of the blue.
Right. And you know that a clot is bad in the leg, but you don't think when you're putting her back to do surgery on her leg that this could happen, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that couldn't have been in your mind. It wouldn't have been in my mind.
No, because she, besides asthma, she was a healthy 13-year-old.
Right.
And she did well for the, first 24 hours. I mean, to the point where she was on the lowest setting of the ECMO.
Yeah.
And they were like, the ECMO tech was like, I don't even think she needs this. She's been doing so great. Her neuro checks were great. I was there that morning, and her nurse, because one of my best friends, my husband stayed that night with her. And one of my best friends stayed, and they were like, the nurse walked in and was like, Taylor, can you give me a thumbs up? She gave a thumbs up. Like,
really?
She was
okay.
So yeah, her neuro checks were great. She could respond if she was having pain, raise her arm, and things like that. So the 2 days following, she was doing great, where we were so hopeful that, all right, we're going to do the ECMO trial and be able to take her off. So the morning of the ECMO trial, one of the ICU physicians was in there, and they were getting everything ready for the trial. And she did her neuro exam and noticed that one of her pupils was not reactive. And so I had spent the night with her that night. And so I just immediately could pick up that something was not right, and I said, are you seeing a change in her neuro exam? And that physician, I could tell that, and this is one thing that I've learned from your podcast, is sometimes some of the medical professionals aren't able to communicate with families. And I'm one that I want to know what's happening. Don't blow me off.
Well, and the other thing is, you're a nurse. I mean,
right.
That's
if you're seeing
a huge difference, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, not every mom would say, are you seeing changes in her neuro exam? They wouldn't word it like that, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
And this doctor's going to know that when he or she says one of the pupils is no longer reactive, you're going to know exactly what that means.
Yeah.
Unlike somebody else that you might be able to kind of get yourself a little more time.
Right.
Being straight with you is tougher, honestly, right?
Yeah. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right. She said, well, her left pupil's not as reactive. And so I was like, oh gosh. And so they were like, well, we're going to take her down for a CT scan and just see. And first they thought, maybe it was all the sedation she was on. So they were weaning down sedation, but nothing, was changing. So they took her down for her CT scan, which shows she did have a pretty severe brain bleed. So they called neuro in to see if it, they thought they could do, operate on it. He felt like he was, pretty confident that he could. And so we were like, okay, well, let's do it.
Yeah.
So they prepped her for her craniotomy that day, took her down, and surgery probably lasted maybe 3 hours. And I guess I was just so, I don't know, just like, let's get it done, and whatever. And so
for sure,
when they told us surgery was over, they called us in the, consultation room, and he explained when they put the monitor in, her pressure in her brain was like at 53. And I think normal is like a below 15 or something like that. And
that's what I was thinking.
As soon as they relieved the pressure, they said it went down to like 8. And I was like, oh, good. Okay. But then they said as soon as they closed her skin, it went back up. And I was like, oh, and so he was like, so it's just going to be the next 24 to 48 hours will be crucial to know. We're hoping that her brain can just rest and swelling, can eventually go down. And so I was like, okay, and can we see her? And he was like, absolutely. So they took us in to see her. And I was just so taken back because my child had long, beautiful hair. So to see my child, and then I don't know why, I'm a nurse. I know that her hair is gone, but she was so swollen, looked like such a different child. So it was just like, oh my gosh, like this is happening, and she was, before we even, I say it was probably 2 hours after, we were still just kind of processing everything. And they were very kind at the hospital. They had let us just keep that little consultation room for my family to camp out in. And probably 2 hours later, one of the fellows came in and said, I've been told, because palliative care had come in and just, was like, and at first I was very like, why are you here? I don't want to talk to palliative care because I know what that means. And they were so great and so nice and just like, what do you need from us? And, I did share that I want to know if you see things, I want to know. I know some parents are, if it's not happening, don't tell me that you think this may happen, if you see one sign, and I want to know when it happens. And for me, if you're seeing changes, I want to, just because I like to be able to kind of mentally prepare myself.
Right.
So he came in, he was like, I've been told that you like to know when things are happening. And so I'm just going to let you know that pupil is blown again. And so by that point, because we had been several days in and I was just exhausted, I hadn't really slept. While that week we were there, I took 1 day away and let my husband stay. And so one of my very best friends was, she's like, I will stay with her. She's like, y'all need to go get rest. And I said, okay. And so we left my husband's car there, and my husband and I came home to rest. I mean, I didn't get much sleep, but what we could get. Not. I woke up, I guess around 6 o'clock that morning, and my friend that day was a nurse too. And so I texted her and I said, how is she? And she said, the nurses have been busy with her all night. She's had 3 nurses at her bedside all night. She said her urine is pretty much blood. I just knew, I didn't have a good feeling about it. And so I was kind of mentally preparing myself.
And if you've got 3 nurses for one patient, things are really, really bad.
Yeah.
I mean, as you talk about this story, it's just, I so often see this. I mean, I think about this in that, like, one thing goes wrong and then you do that and then it's the next thing and then it's the next thing. And it seems like it's a lot of little things and like, okay, we can fix this. Okay, we can fix this. Okay, we can fix this. But now you're like 4 steps down the road and you realize how far now have we come from a sore leg a week ago, right?
Right.
It just all happens gradually. I mean, although very quickly, but still in some ways gradually, because it's one thing after another. You didn't go from, a sore leg to a blown pupil and blood in the urine and all of this. It was this incremental kind of change.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it was the fact that she was doing well.
Right.
And then she wasn't.
Right. Right.
And my friend also told me, she's like, they want to talk to you, but they are thinking, she started clotting off the ECMO machine.
Okay.
And so they were, wanting to speak to us, because they were going to have to switch the machine out.
I mean, it's such a balance, right? So when you're on, I didn't really explain this, but to people that don't know what an ECMO machine is, so the ECMO machine works as your heart and your lungs. So it's doing all the work of both things. And when you're on a machine like that, you really want to make sure they're not clotting. And so you have to make sure that that's not going to happen. But a risk for that, when you have to keep the blood so it can't clot, is that then you can have bleeds. in the head. So, which is what ended up happening. So, and then now that she has a bleed in the head, I'm sure they're like, okay, we can't have the medication up as high as we should for the ECMO machine because we don't want her bleeding anymore. So they turn that medication down, but now she's at risk of clotting in the machine again. Right. So it's this balance of what you need to do.
And I need to back up. I forgot to tell you that in one of her CT scans, they found that she had May-Thurner syndrome.
Okay. I'm not familiar with that. So
it's iliac vein compression syndrome. Okay. So it's when the left iliac vein is compressed by the right iliac vein, and they pretty much cause compression, and that slowing of the blood flow can build up clot.
Okay, so that would be why this happened maybe originally. I mean, the birth control pills could have certainly had something to do with it, but in a young teenage girl, you usually don't think twice about them getting blood clots.
Right. So they found that. And so we were trying to wait for my husband's parents to get in from East Texas, just because within that week of time, we had so many of my great friends here to help with our daughter with autism. But that was also kind of hard for her because these are not her normal people, and so we were trying to keep her with as much of a stable routine as possible. And so my husband was trying to wait for his parents to come. So my best friend took me to the hospital. But when I walked in and they were like, "Is your husband with you?" I was like, he needs to get here. Yeah. And so we had a friend come over and stay with my daughter, and someone brought my husband to the hospital. The doctor talked to us, and, she just said, "Taylor's had a hard night. She's very sick." And so they just explained everything to us. And they said, we can definitely try to switch the ECMO machine, but her swelling in her brain is pretty significant. And now we're seeing slower reactivity with her other people. Yeah. We had to make the hard decision to withdraw care, which is something no parent, would want to have to do. But I just couldn't see having her, that would not be fair to have her go on for days and days. And even if, God willing, something happened, she would not have a good quality of life. No. And that was just not fair to her. So we made that decision, and the ICU children was great. They allowed my sister was there, my best friend and her sister. It was probably 9 of us there, and they let us do foot mows, and they let us pray her into heaven, and just have our goodbyes. And I'm so thankful for my friends that were there with me, because it was definitely like an out-of-body experience, for me. I think so, to have someone in the background doing the thinking of the things that you couldn't think of at that time. Mm-hmm. One of my friends got her fingerprint, and they got me a little necklace made after she passed. They have her little, and I know you have one. Yeah, I have one for Andy. And so just to have people in the background thinking of the things that you couldn't think of. But we just prayed over her, and my child loved Kids Bop. Even though she was 13, she still was so young at heart or whatever. And so we played her favorite little songs. And when she passed, it was just my husband and my sister in there, and they clamped the ECMO machine. Of course, the nurse and me, I'm watching the monitor, so I could tell, heart rate spiking up, and just going to VTAC, and then it slowly started trending down. And so I think they kind of realized, oh gosh, let me turn the monitor off. So they turned the monitor off. Right. And I'd say probably 2 minutes after that, the doctor came in and said, "Taylor's heart has stopped beating. I'm going to, listen to double check." And she did. And then she told us, "I'm sorry, Taylor has passed away." And so that was definitely, I will say I'm only 43 years old, but that was definitely one of the hardest things I've experienced thus far.
Likely the hardest, right? I'm sure you can't think of anything worse.
So she passed April 23rd, and leaving the hospital was the hardest thing. Mm-hmm. And funny, because I had to leave the girls when they were preemies, coming home, not being able to take my babies home. And I thought that was the hardest thing. But walking out of that hospital without my child was hard. But I'm so thankful, because my village of friends, they handled everything. They handled coordinating with the chaplain to, have the funeral home come get us. It was I'm so blessed that, my husband and I just had to show up. They handled the time of the meeting with the funeral home. We literally just had to show up because there was no way, at that time we could process doing all those things.
No. It is such a
And so,
blessing to have people just do it
yeah.
for you. I had that.
Uh-huh.
I had people just doing
Yeah.
it for me, and because I couldn't do anything. I couldn't even do my
Mm-hmm.
hair. I mean, I was like, I couldn't do anything. I just needed people to be walking me through
Uh-huh.
every single step of the way. And I agree.
Mm-hmm.
One of the hardest things I've ever done in my life, honestly, and this probably also had to do with the fact that we were in a car accident, but was
Mm-hmm.
the next day when we were leaving the hospital to physically get in the car. Like, it
Mm-hmm.
was just,
I remember you saying that.
it was just so difficult. And I remember just my mind just screaming, no, no, no. Like, you can't do
Mm-hmm.
this. Like, I did not want to go home and see his empty room. I did not want to do that. I just,
Mm-hmm.
so, so painful. It was so hard.
Yeah. I definitely know and feel that it was only the Holy Spirit that carried me through that day. And it just so happened that one of my friends from nursing school, and it shows you how God works, she lost her son, I guess probably 6 or 7 years ago now. And I remember following her journey as her son died from childhood cancer. And she actually was working the day that Taylor died. She had been on vacation. And so she had messaged me when she, saw my Facebook post that we were in the hospital asking for prayers. And, she was like, I'm on vacation, but I will be back. I hope to come see you soon. And she had actually just got back from her vacation. And she rotates roles, but her role that day was working with palliative care and helping parents who were faced with end of life decisions to make, just help them guide them through the day. So she was actually, that was her assignment that day. When Taylor passed, she was there to help me walk me through the journey that she had been through. I know. And so she was such a blessing.
I mean, you can't tell me God wasn't involved in that one,
No,
right? I mean,
yeah.
The chances of it being someone that you knew and trusted and that you had, that you would know for sure she had gone through that, right? Like you had watched her go through it. So you knew she knew exactly.
And she actually reached out. Taylor passed on April 23rd. We had her service on May 2nd, which was a Monday. And she reached out prior to that Monday, which happened to be that Sunday the day before her service was Bereaved Parent Mother's Day. And she reached out to me on that day, and her husband and her had bought a vacation home. It happened to be the last place that she had traveled with her son before he passed. And so they loved that time that they had with him. And so they purchased it. And that was their way of using that house to give back to anyone else who had to walk in their shoes. So they offered their home to us to go and just have time after the service to get away. And so after Taylor's service on that Monday, that following Saturday, my immediate family and I went down to her beach house and just stayed for 4 or 5 days just to
get away.
And so I was like, that's totally God that, had her in place that day that Taylor passed. And I'll tell you, that child, her service, there were probably 200 people there. And it was from her kindergarten teachers to like all the way up to her 7th grade teachers, because she was such a good kid. I mean, my work family was such a blessing. So many people attended her service, where the night shift nurses on my unit were covering for the day shift staff, because that's how so much support we had. So I was very blessed. I'm so grateful, but it definitely has been life-changing to lose a child, obviously, as you know, and just the journey of now helping her sister cope in her own way. And
how has that been?
With her, we didn't take her to the hospital just because Morgan has such sensory issues that been so hard. Overwhelming for her. So we just had to, when Taylor was in the hospital, we would tell her Taylor was in the hospital. And when she passed, Taylor's in heaven. And so she would repeat what we said, but we didn't know what she knew. But now that Taylor's been gone, for the funeral service, we did a slideshow. One of my best friends put together a slideshow, and the first song on it was Life is a Highway. that they play on cars.
Yeah.
And so we played that slideshow before our service for our family while they were here, just because we knew that they wouldn't see it. It would play before the service started. And so we played that here, and she came out of her room and she stared at the screen and looked at all the pictures and just kind of looked like puzzled.
Yeah.
And we didn't think anything of it. But now that kid plays that song every day.
Really?
Every day. She plays that song every day. And like when she gets in from school this afternoon, she's going to grab her iPad and she plays that song and just sings it or whatever. And so,
that's her
we'll
way,
say,
isn't it? That's her
that's her way of
thinking about her sister.
And I was able to, donate a lot of Taylor's books to her school and a lot of her stuffed animals. Morgan is big on stuffed animals. So I gave her the stuffed animals, and we've noticed that the way Taylor had the stuffed animals in her room is how Morgan has them in her room. Yeah. So I definitely think that it's how she is feeling connected to her sister.
Yeah. We talked too about the fact that you lost your mother only 3 months before Taylor died. Mm-hmm. Do you want to talk about that a little bit and how that kind of impacted you a little?
My mom passed January 4th of this year. She had been on hospice. So we were, mentally prepared. Yeah. She was 77 years old. We would be getting to that place. She had lung failure, and it was to the point where she would have to be on like a BiPAP 24 hours a day.
Yeah.
And being in a hospital, she's like, I don't want to live that life. I want to enjoy the time I have now. So we knew, that she would, this was not going to end the way we would hope. And that was her decision to make. And so she passed. And one funny thing that I'll share, not funny, but it just shows to me, it was a sign. Before my mom passed in the nursing home, with me being up here in Dallas, my sister was in East Texas with her. And one day my sister went to go visit her. And when they're on hospital, some days they're just sleeping all day, not eating. And one day my sister went to go see her, and she was like, who is this person? Because she was, alert. And I guess this is that burst of energy they have right before. And she told my sister, just going through, are you going to be okay when I pass? And I was like, Mom, we'll be fine. We want you to be at peace, and this is your decision. And she told her, she said, Yolanda, Jamesia is going to need you. And she told her, she said, well, Mama, I got her. I got the whole family. And she said, no, do you hear me? Jamesia will need you. And she was like, okay. And then later on that day, she would say, Yolanda, do you see that little pretty girl running down the hallway with that long, pretty hair standing out there? She's had this bright light right there by her. My sister was like, no, I don't, I don't see anything. And so looking back, we wonder, was that God showing my mom that Taylor would be with her? I don't know, but it's just so, I remember my sister and I having these conversations before Taylor passed, and couldn't make sense of everything.
And then it makes a little more sense afterwards, doesn't it?
It makes a little bit more sense. So I was actually, it's crazy how God works. Taylor, we had her in therapy just for her anxiety, and she had just progressed to not needing therapy as often because she was doing so great, but I was struggling from the loss of my mom. Yeah. And so the therapist was so great with her, and I'm like, well, I'll take her slot. Yeah. Because I was really struggling with the grief of my mom, just being up here and having a family and kids. The weight fell on my sister with her being single and right in the area with my mom. And so I just had a lot of guilt about that and things to work through. So I took over Taylor's therapy sessions. When Taylor passed, the day after Taylor's service, I was having my very first therapy session to deal with the grief of my mom.
Oh, my word.
And so now I had to have the therapy of my child. And I kept that therapy session. Her service was on that Monday, and I still had family in from out of town, but I was like, I'm going to therapy because I need this. And so I've still been going every 2 weeks. Her therapist was awesome. And it's been great because she knows Taylor as the child she was and me as her mom. And so it's just been so helpful to kind of process all of the things.
Yeah. I mean, talk about having a tribe kind of helping you. Andy died on a Wednesday night. And Thursday, we have a special needs care coordinator in our office, and she found therapists and therapy appointments for every single person in my family for Friday. I mean, it was like, it was before the funeral. Like, okay, so Peter's therapy is this, Catherine's therapy is here, you and Eric are going here, and then Valeriano, our foster son, she even made one for him, although he refused to go. Like, I think people are at such a loss on, like, I don't know what to do, and she, of course, she's a coordinator. Like, that's what she does, is coordinate services. So she decided, I'm coordinating all of this therapy for the entire family, which, you know, it in some ways it was a little too early, because we were just all so much in shock, you know?
For me, I already struggle with depression and anxiety. And so like I would always say, oh, that poor Taylor, she got it from her mom, you know, whatever, but with her anxiety, whatever. So I knew for me, I was like, I need to keep this. Has happened for a reason. This lined up for a reason. I need to keep this.
Well, and the nice thing is you actually had a relationship with her. So even though it was your first session, I mean, Taylor had seen her for a long time. Plus, what a beautiful thing to see someone who knew Taylor.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, like, you think about all the therapists my family saw. Nobody knew Andy. Nobody did. So to have that she actually knew her and her personality and the little things that you were going to miss. I mean, what a blessing. Right?
It was awesome because when Taylor had her therapy, my husband works a weird, like 3 to 11 schedule. And so I would always, with Morgan, she was kind of difficult to kind of sit and wait for the hour session. So thankfully the therapist is like 10 minutes from the house. So I would take Taylor and check her in. And then I would say, okay, I'm going to be back at this time. And so I would bring Morgan home, give her a bath, get her fed or whatever, and then go back and get Taylor. So she knew me as Taylor's mom. And so, you know, and Morgan's mom. So that has been for her to, when I go through those moments of questioning every single thing, like, did I get her to the hospital at a time, you know, in time, or did I give her enough time? Like all those things I'm questioning sometimes.
Which we all do. I mean, I can tell you that you didn't, and I mean that you did great and you did everything as you were supposed to, and you know that in your head, but you still question it, right? You still do.
And I still struggle with it to this day of just all the things of me leaving, you know, the hospital and not making it back before they gave her the Versed, like all those little things. And I know that's just me processing my grief.
Right. And it's one of those things too, though, that honestly, I'm sure it wouldn't have made a bit of difference, right? A half an hour or whatever. So if you would have said, no, I need you to wait until I get back, I'll be there in 20 minutes. And they would have waited and she would have had the same outcome. Then what would you be saying to yourself? You'd be saying, why did I make them wait? If I wouldn't have made them wait, she wouldn't have thrown the clot. She wouldn't have whatever, right? So it's one of those things that you put yourself in a no-win situation. You beat yourself up over everything, even knowing, like, had I made the opposite decision, I would be kicking myself for that too.
And I think that's just the things we do as moms, you know, is just, you know, I remember on one of your podcasts, someone said, like, who's watching my child now? Who's mothering them? You know, and like, that was a thing. And I'm like, I know Taylor, you know, I'm a firm believer. So I feel like she's in heaven, you know, that she ran into Jesus's arms, you know, but sometimes I'm like, is she okay? You know, like, and I'm like, I know she's okay.
Right,
you know?
right. And I do too.
You know,
but
and I remember asking my sister, I was like, I wonder if she misses us. You know, she's like, there's no sorrow in heaven, you know, and it's just like all those little.
Which doesn't seem to make sense in some ways, right? Because I think, Andy was such a mama's boy. I mean, just unbelievable mama's boy. So I can't imagine him not being sad and missing me with just what a mama's boy he was. Right? And Taylor was like your best friend. So like, you think she's got to be sad and missing me. It's
because
so
Marcy,
hard.
I would come in from work and I would feed her dinner and she'd just be staring at me. And I'm like, why are you staring at me? And she's like, Mom, I just love you. I just love looking at you, you know, and like at nighttime, our bedtime routine was she'd come give me a hug and she would not let go until I would say, get off. That was our thing. Like she would hug me tight. I mean, and just love was not one of the kids that were, oh my gosh, I don't want to give my mom a hug or kiss. Like, very affectionate.
My Andy was 14 years old and he still would want to cuddle with his mama.
Yeah.
And we would still do this thing too. He was, you know, he was still always little, but he loved it if he would lay between my husband and I, and then my husband and I would hug and we'd make an Andy sandwich. So Andy was between us, and we'd like squish him. And he was like, here's our
Yeah.
Andy sandwich. We didn't do that with the other two kids. The other two kids would be like, weirdo, mom and dad,
Right.
you know? But Andy
Yeah.
loved it. And he loved cuddling. And I remember thinking to myself, man, he's 14. One of these days, he's just going to decide this is stupid. I'm not doing it anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
But in some ways, I feel like God knew that he
Yeah.
wasn't going to be around. And so he let him have that desire the whole
Yeah.
time, like far past what his younger brother ever did or his older sister ever did, just because, God knew. And like, let's just give her that. Let's just give her that little gift and let him in many ways stay a little boy and not be as grown up. You know what I mean?
Exactly. I sometimes can remember myself saying at work, like someone's talking about their child is the same age. I'm like, oh my gosh, my baby's still playing with like stuffed animals, at the same age. And I remember my coworkers saying, let that baby be a baby. And I'm like, you're right. And I'm so like looking back now.
Aren't you so glad you did?
Oh, so glad. I mean, pure heart. And I remember when we were planning her service, one of the ministers came over and we were just talking about Taylor, and I would just talk about how great of a kid she was. And, like I had a teacher that emailed me just saying that after Taylor passed, she would sit in her chair every day because that made her feel connected to her because she missed her so much. And she was like, did you ever think that she was like a super, like almost like an angel here on earth? And after she said that, my husband and I both just looked at each other and was like, oh my God, because she was so pure at heart and so innocent.
I've had people say the same thing to me about Andy because he never really was like a normal kid in a lot of ways. He was just really pretty sweet kid and pretty forgiving and never held a grudge and that kind of stuff. And just not like a normal kid. He just never was. Yeah. And that other people have said to me kind of those type of things. And I was like, man, he was a brat at times too. So no, he wasn't an angel, but yet you see a little bit of that. And I do feel like that was a little gift that I got from God, right? Because gosh, I've talked to families and seen families who aren't getting along with their kids so great at that time.
Right.
When something happens and they die and they had been in conflict. And I do feel blessed that I never had that with Andy. Right?
Yeah, I agree. I definitely agree. I am so thankful that, and with Taylor with her anxiety, I would always tell her, God loves you more than me. Yep. And I love you so, so much. Yeah. And I would always tell her that God is just allowing me to be your mommy here, but he is your father. And so when she got sick, I would have to tell myself that, that he's in control. He belongs to him. And so that is what gets me through is that, he gave me 13 years with her, but she belonged to him, and he could have chosen to, if he wanted to, he could have chosen to make Taylor better, but it was her time. He wanted her with him, and so I've definitely, not that God caused Taylor's death to bring me closer to him, but I do feel as a result that this is what happened. I've always been a Christian, but I feel like my relationship was not a deep one, an intimate one. And
well, now you know your baby's there. I mean, it does make things different, right?
Yeah.
It makes it different.
So for me, that is what has gotten me through is just knowing that I'll see her again in heaven, and she's not in any pain, and I will see her again. That gives me strength to go through, but I will not lie and say some days are so hard.
Right. And it's wonderful that you can say that today, that you feel like you're closer and things like that. And I will be the first to tell you every day is not going to feel that way because there are going to be days that will come and like, nope, I'm just going to be mad today. But knowing that that's okay too. Okay. That's okay too. It's funny. And I love what you said about those words that you said to Taylor, now having to say those to yourself, because I feel that same way with Andy. The Bible verse that I always said with Andy was, be still and know that I am God. We used to say that over and over and over again. Whenever he felt anxious, be still and know that I am God. And I find myself now I have to say that to me. And it's interesting that I mean, that those are the words that I said to him. So I have to be able to claim them for myself when I had him claim them for himself.
It's kind of like practice what you preach.
Practice what you preach. Exactly. So I have my bracelet, my Be Still bracelet that I wear all the time. And maybe someday I'll have the guts to put the Be Still tattoo on that I was going to do that I haven't done yet. But we'll see if that ever happens. I don't know. Oh,
it is definitely a journey, just, because 2 weeks ago we were getting ready for school to start back up, and I was not in a good place. I mean, I was just, how grief, you can be here and there, and I was sad every day. I was angry. I felt like this is not fair, but I was like, God can handle it. He still loves me on days when I am at perfect peace and days when I feel like this is just so unfair, know.
And that's so comforting to know that. I mean, I love that, because that's the last thing I need, is to feel guilty that I'm not being a good Christian.
Right.
Like that.
Exactly.
That makes things so much worse. And so that's what I have to keep telling myself, and hoping that other people don't say that to me, because then I just get mad at them. But don't be sad. Andy's in heaven. Like, I know Andy's in heaven, but I'm still sad.
But I can still be sad. Right. Yep. And I think definitely from your podcast, some of the things you say is how you don't want anyone to forget his name.
Yeah.
And say Andy's name. That has been my biggest concern. Just had people who now the majority of people have been great and stood by me, but I've had a few people who, if they see me, they run the other way because they just don't know what to say. And that makes me sad. Yeah. But then I have to think about it, that's not me. That's on them,
Right. It's something that they just can't deal with.
Right.
Which is understandable, right? I mean, it's so understandable. I wish I could not deal with it. I wish I could.
Yeah. Right. Didn't have to. Yeah.
And they kind of have the choice, right? They have the choice to talk to you and interact with you or not. And we just don't have that choice. We have to live it every day and every second of every day.
And I've been off work. Like, I haven't been back to work since before she was sick. Just being a labor and delivery nurse, it's just kind of hard to be able to process it all. And it may change the way that I am with my patients. When I had my girls as preemies, it totally changed the way I could relate to my moms who are having premature babies. Unfortunately, labor and delivery is not always happy. We do have those, moms who have losses. So it may be perfectly fine, and I will be able to be a better nurse and be able to relate to them. I don't know. Yeah. And I think it will only be one of those things I know when I test the waters.
I mean, I think very likely it will make you better.
Yeah.
But it's hard to think about that right away. I remember at the visitation before Andy's funeral, a pediatrician came up to me and just kind of hugged me. And I remember saying to him, he's not in my practice. He's an older pediatrician. He's retired now even. I said to him, I don't think I can do this anymore. I don't think I can be a pediatrician anymore. And he said, you can and you will, because it's who you are, and you'll do it better than you ever did it before. And it took me a year. Yeah. I mean, I tried and I failed. I was miserable at the beginning. But a year later, I went back, and you know what? He's right. I am better than I ever was before. Now, it looks different and things look different. And for you, it may not look the same. I mean, it's hard to know. Yeah. But overall, I feel like every person that I've talked to, although all moms would exchange anything to get their kid back. But I think all of us feel like when you're down the road a ways, that you're actually a more compassionate person than you were beforehand. And that you feel that more for people.
Yeah. And I totally agree. While we were in the hospital with Taylor, there was another family who was there with their son, and they had been there a week before we were there. But we, being, in the ICU, became acquainted, and my family and friends became acquainted with them. And unfortunately, their son passed. Yeah. And when my daughter passed, the dad showed up, and we had just known each other a little over a week. He showed up to Taylor's funeral. And that meant so much to me that these people who didn't really know me sent flowers and showed up to the funeral. And so when their son passed, a couple of my friends attended the service because I was like, it just showed me like when people show up for you, how much that meant.
Yeah.
So this has definitely changed, even on this level of just the compassion, to know how much it means when people show that compassion to you. So.
And just like you said, just showing up and just being there. It's just so
And
huge.
sometimes you don't even have to say anything, just the presence of being there, is just sometimes all you need, just to sit with me.
Right. Don't say anything. It's funny how much I learned that, because just this last Thanksgiving, my foster son Valeriano's mother died in Guatemala, and he just found out with a phone call that she had died. And he's kind of a closed off kid. He's, not probably the healthiest emotionally just because of his background and baggage and things like that. But I remember going downstairs and, saying, "Do you want to talk?" And he said, "No." And I just said, "Do you mind if I just sit here? We don't have to say anything." And he said, "Okay." And I just sat there. Yeah. I just sat beside him. And you knew he didn't want to say anything. He didn't want to talk. It was so much going on in his head. But he knew that having me sit there was good. And I knew, having gone through what I went through, that I just needed to be there. I didn't need to do a darn thing or say a darn thing, because nothing I said was going to make it better.
Right.
But just being there and being present was enough for him at that moment. And it's not what I would have done. I've lost my mom, but it's still not what I would have done before losing Andy. It's changed my whole perspective.
I remember the night that Taylor coded, and the chaplain from the hospital came in, and she just sat beside me and she rested her hand on my back, and she never said a word.
Yeah.
And I think she probably just rested her hand on my back for about 2 minutes. And that was just so calming to me.
Yeah.
Because she didn't, there was nothing she could say to change what was happening.
No.
But that just really showed just that impact of just sitting with someone.
Yeah. I'm present. I'm here with you. I'm here with you.
Now things are kind of looking kind of different. It's just still so strange.
Well, yeah, you're 4 months in. I mean, it's still so
quiet. And just trying to figure out, me going back to work. My husband went back probably 3 weeks after she passed, because that's what he felt he needed to do, obviously with me being in labor and delivery. And my job has allowed me to come up one day and just put scrubs on and just sit in the environment. I didn't go in a delivery or anything like that, but just sit in the environment.
Oh, that's nice.
And it was very nice. But it just when I left, it was just like, gosh, the last time I was here in scrubs, she was alive. Like all those things played in my head. This life is going to look so different. My job has been great. My clinical manager's like, you can just, take the time you need. But financially, it's kind of like, we've got to make some decisions. I was so blessed the community did garage sales. They did a GoFundMe, but medical bills are crazy.
Yeah.
So we're just, trying to see when I'll go back to work. But I've used that time just to kind of try to heal. And I did, even though I'm so early, I'm kind of one of those doers. And so
me too.
As of last week, my husband and I was able to start a foundation.
Wow.
We started Mayflowers for Maytherners. Mayflowers, the Taylor George Foundation. Because, April showers, Mayflowers. And so just hoping to provide, awareness about Maytherner syndrome, and just hopefully seeing if, maybe prior to, because I really feel like I've recently been diagnosed with an underlying blood clotting disorder. So it just makes me wonder, did Taylor have an underlying disorder that we didn't know about prior to her being put on birth control? So just trying to see, maybe we can put some kind of testing in place before females are prescribed oral contraceptives, or, and she was an avid reader. So just trying to do like pop-up libraries and just things to kind of honor her.
Yeah.
Because I do want to keep her memory alive. She was such a good kid. And so that is, kind of where I'm focusing my energy. And
it is nice to have somewhere to focus your energy a little bit. It's like somewhere to do something with your grief, right?
Yeah.
Because it's hard when your grief has nowhere to go. So if you can find a little bit of purpose for it, and it can be big or little, it doesn't have to look the same for everyone, but it is really helpful to have some kind of purpose for it a little bit. And it can take a long time to find that. You found it kind of quickly, but. Mm-hmm.
Well, and I just, I think about you when you say that you doing your podcast is like you with Andy, you're doing it with Andy.
I'm doing it with Andy. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so just definitely losing a child, I'm thankful, even though I hate we're all in this club.
Yeah.
I'm thankful that there are people like you that we can draw strength from each other.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Oh, well, thank you so much for sharing Taylor with us today. I mean, what a bright light.
You're welcome.
What a light.
Yeah. He was a great kid.
Thanks for listening. If you found this helpful or would like to support the podcast, please leave a 5-star rating and comment. To help financially, you can text Andy's Mom to the number 53555 or visit the donate page on andysmom.com. Your donations are secure and tax deductible, and we are now able to accept Venmo, PayPal, and Apple Pay. Always Andy's Mom is a registered 501c3 organization and can receive donations through smile.amazon.com, Thrivent Financial, and Benevity, amongst others. Marcy loves hearing from listeners. Please feel free to reach out to her via email at marcy@andysmom.com. Also, be sure to sign up for the email list to receive weekly updates as well as pictures of all of Marcy's guests and their children. Together, let's work to inspire hope, one day at a time.